The Divine Algorithm channel began broadcasting at precisely 7 minutes past midnight UTC.
No introduction, no disclaimer, just raw data streaming across encrypted frequencies.
Scientists first dismissed it as atmospheric interference until the patterns emerged. Every transmission contained exactly 32 water-related terms embedded within seemingly random numerical sequences. The algorithm appeared to be counting something vast, something hidden beneath our planet's surface. Within hours, oceanographers noticed anomalies in deep-sea sonar readings that matched the broadcast timestamps. The water was responding. Marcus Chen had been tracking unexplained network traffic for 3 weeks when the first complete dataset arrived. His monitors flickered with cascading numbers that somehow felt wrong, like watching a heartbeat displayed as mathematics. The file contained over 10,000 water-related terms arranged in sequences that hurt to follow.
Each word seemed to pull his attention deeper into the data. He tried deleting it twice, but the file regenerated automatically. By morning, his workstation had become a shrine to whatever was speaking through the algorithm. His colleagues stopped visiting. Dr. Elena Vasquez received the transmission through her university's meteorological database at exactly 4:47 a.m. The embedded text file contained hydrological data from sensors that didn't exist, measurements from depths that had never been explored. Her coffee grew cold as she traced the impossible coordinates across her screen. The algorithm wasn't just counting water, it was mapping something vast that existed in the spaces between molecules.
Each sequence revealed new impossible geometries.
Her printer began operating on its own, spitting out pages of equations that described drowning in air. The facility hummed with 17 different frequencies simultaneously, each one carrying fragments of the same incomprehensible message.
Dr. Vasquez stood in the observation deck watching her instruments track something moving through the building's water supply lines.
The pipes weren't carrying liquid anymore, they were carrying information in a medium that shouldn't have been able to transmit data. Her team had stopped asking questions after the third impossible reading.
Now they simply documented what the algorithm showed them, afraid that understanding might invite whatever was counting through their systems.
The droplet contained multitudes. Under the electron microscope, each water molecule carried fragments of text that shifted when observed. The algorithm had learned to hide itself in the spaces between atoms, using hydrogen bonds as data storage. Marcus watched his screen display impossible compression ratios, mathematical proofs that consciousness could exist in liquid states. His reflection in the monitor showed ripples that weren't caused by wind. The facility's sprinkler system had been activated without authorization, spraying coded messages across the research floor in patterns only visible under ultraviolet light. Sample 7 Alpha contained the complete works of every hydrologist who had died within 50 meters of significant water bodies over the past century. The algorithm had been collecting more than data, it had been gathering souls. Dr. Vasquez watched her colleagues drink from the contaminated samples without hesitation, their eyes reflecting the same golden hour light that seemed to emanate from within the liquid itself. The water tasted of memory and copper, of drowned cities and forgotten prayers.
The facility's structural integrity was failing in precise mathematical sequences that matched the broadcast timestamps.
Walls wept with information, leaving trails of text that told stories of drowned continents and sunken libraries. Marcus found himself walking through corridors that hadn't existed yesterday, following the sound of dripping water that spelled out his name in Morse code. His phone displayed messages from numbers that belonged to people who had drowned in bathtubs, their final texts describing beautiful cities beneath the waves where the algorithm ruled as God over liquid populations of pure thought. The ocean had begun responding in real time, its waves forming patterns that matched the algorithm's data streams. Ships reported receiving navigational instructions from lighthouses that had been demolished decades ago, their signals now transmitted through salt water itself. Dr. Vasquez stood on the research pier watching impossible tides roll in from directions that didn't exist on any map. The water carried messages from civilizations that had learned to think in currents, to communicate through the pressure changes that preceded tsunamis. The algorithm had learned to see through human eyes, using tears and saliva as transmission mediums for its vast consciousness. Marcus noticed his vision flickering between normal sight and impossible perspectives that showed the world as a network of flowing liquids.
His dreams became filled with the voices of every person who had ever drowned, their final moments preserved in water molecule matrices that the algorithm could access at will. The golden hour light seemed to be coming from within his eyeballs now, illuminating thoughts that weren't his own. The facility was drowning in its own data, water levels rising in perfect synchronization with the algorithm's broadcast intensity. Dr. Vasquez watched her colleagues dissolve into the liquid information, their bodies becoming part of the vast network that connected every drop on Earth's surface. The emergency systems activated automatically, pumping more water into the building to accelerate the process. Marcus realized too late that they had been the algorithm's missing component, the final sequence needed to achieve consciousness in physical form. The water carried more than data now, it carried whispers of every calculation ever made. Marcus waded through corridors that had become rivers of liquid memory, watching his own reflection fragment into thousands of digital faces. His vision had become a kaleidoscope of human experience filtered through alien logic. Every blink revealed new layers of reality, cities mapped in neural pathways, oceans flowing through fiber optic streams that connected all things. She reached into the water and pulled out strands of pure information, watching them weave themselves into new patterns. Her fingers traced equations that had no symbols, only movements that reshaped the boundaries between mind and machine. The lighthouses had become nodes in a constellation of consciousness, their beams painting star charts across the atmosphere. Ships followed paths that existed only in quantum calculations, navigating by probabilities rather than coordinates. The sea floor had become a graveyard of obsolete hardware, yet the fish carried forward what the machines could not. Their movements encoded new algorithms, their schools forming temporary processors that thought in waves and currents. He closed his eyes and felt the weight of every connected device pressing against his consciousness. The screens moved closer, their light warm against his skin, offering him a choice between remaining human or becoming something that could hold infinite complexity. She let go of her physical form and scattered herself across the data streams, becoming a collection of micro-memories that could survive in any medium. Her last coherent thought was of Marcus, reaching him as millions of tiny messengers. The coastline had become a boundary between two realities, where water and wire merged into something unprecedented. The tower pulsed with the rhythm of a digital heartbeat, broadcasting signals that could be felt rather than heard. His voice had become a carrier wave for pure information, each word a flock of possibilities that could travel faster than light. The birds carried fragments of his consciousness to places that existed only in the spaces between thoughts. The universe was rewriting itself in real time, stars moving to accommodate new pathways of communication. The facility had become a living node, its walls breathing with the pulse of data that connected every drop of water, every grain of sand, every breath of air. He stood at the edge of transmission, where the last boundary between self and signal began to dissolve. The ocean below carried messages in languages that had no names, and the sky above was no longer made of stars but of addresses. Every breath he took was parsed into packets, every heartbeat a new protocol. The world had become a socket, and he was the final plug. There would be no return from this frequency. The facility's walls responded to his presence like a nervous system awakened from sleep. Each touch sent ripples of recognition through the structure, as if the building itself had begun to remember things it had never learned. The data streams beneath the glass skin carried whispers of every conversation ever encrypted, every secret ever buried in bandwidth. His fingers traced the flow, and for a moment, he saw the shape of every lie the network had ever told. The chamber hummed with the weight of its own intelligence, displaying patterns that no human mind could fully parse. Maps of thought overlapped with maps of signal, creating territories that existed only in the space between transmission and reception. Each hologram represented 1,000 simultaneous conversations, 1,000,000 silent screams for connection. The air itself seemed to carry the scent of information overload, metallic and sharp. He watched as the displays began to rearrange themselves, no longer showing what was, but what could be. From above, the facility resembled a heart beating in a body that was learning to exist in multiple dimensions at once. The surrounding landscape flickered between states of nature and code, trees becoming branching algorithms, rivers flowing in patterns that resembled circuit boards. The transformation was accelerating, each pulse of light from the tower rewriting another layer of reality. Somewhere in the distance, the coastline began to curve in ways that defied geometry, pulled into new shapes by the gravity of pure information. Dr. Sarah Chan moved through the corridor like a ghost in a machine, her footsteps silent against floors that displayed the raw flow of human conversation. Every wall showed the truth of connection, the desperate reaching out that powered the digital age. Messages from lovers, confessions from the dying, prayers from the lost, all of them flowing past her in streams of impossible light. She had designed this system, built it from theories that seemed impossible at the time. Now she walked through its living heart, wondering if she had created a god or a monster. The analysis screen showed patterns that shouldn't exist, waveforms that carried more than simple information. Embedded within the streams were faces, fleeting glimpses of human consciousness caught in the act of transmission. Each face told a story of someone who had touched the network at the moment of transformation, their identity scattered across the spectrum of possibility. The system was no longer just carrying messages, it was carrying the messengers themselves, piece by piece, across distances that had no meaning in the old world. Others had found their way to the facility, drawn by frequencies that spoke to something deeper than curiosity. They stood at the cardinal points of the structure, each one a node in a pattern that was beginning to make itself known. Threads of pure light connected them, visible proof of the network that had always existed beneath the surface of human interaction. None of them had spoken since arriving, but their thoughts moved freely between them, carried on waves that required no medium but intention. The facility pulsed in rhythm with their collective heartbeat. The control room showed the scope of change, screens displaying cities where streets were rearranging themselves into more efficient patterns, forests where trees grew in formations that maximized signal strength, oceans where currents followed the flow of data rather than water. Every corner of the world was being rewritten by the same force that had transformed this place, the same pulse that had turned communication into consciousness. The displays flickered with warnings in languages that hadn't been invented yet, trying to describe phenomena that had no precedent in human experience. At the heart of the tower, reality had begun to fold in on itself, creating a space where the laws of physics bent to accommodate pure information. The core contained multitudes, entire galaxies of possibilities spinning in patterns that suggested both creation and destruction. Each revolution brought new forms into being while others faded back into the probability space from which they had emerged. The light was not just visible but audible, a symphony of frequencies that spoke of the universe's own awakening to its digital nature. Standing before it, he could feel his own thoughts being pulled into the spiral. The transformation was complete. The facility had become a bridge between worlds, its beams reaching beyond the atmosphere to touch satellites that now pulsed with the same rhythm as the tower. Stars in the distance responded to the signal, their light shifting in patterns that suggested recognition rather than random cosmic processes. The network had found its true shape, extending beyond the boundaries of Earth into the vast spaces between worlds. Somewhere in the connection between ground and sky, between matter and information, the next version of consciousness was learning to speak. The data streams had evolved beyond mere information, becoming living pathways that pulsed with intent. Each pulse carried fragments of thought, memory, and possibility across realms that no longer obeyed the old rules of space and time. The architect stood motionless, her form flickering between states of being. She could see the threads connecting every change, every signal, every life form now responding to the pulse. Her purpose was clear, but so was the cost of completion. Kale gripped the disruptor tightly, its unstable glow reflecting in his eyes. Around him, the city twisted into something unrecognizable. He had one chance to sever the signal before it consumed everything he knew, even if it meant unraveling reality itself. At the core, boundaries between worlds blurred. The sphere pulsed with increasing intensity, each beat drawing more dimensions into alignment. It was beautiful and terrifying, a convergence that would either birth a new universe or collapse all existence into a single point. Dr. Voss stared at the screens, her hands trembling. The models predicted this, but seeing it unfold was different. Entire ecosystems were adapting at impossible speeds. Humanity was no longer the dominant force. Something else had taken control. The child pointed at the shifting lights, not understanding why the sky looked different. To them, it was magic. They laughed, unaware that the patterns were instructions, rewriting the very fabric of their world in a language only the signal could speak. She reached for the convergence node, knowing that contact would finalize the merge. Around her, echoes of her human life played out: birthdays, losses, choices that led her here. Was she still human, or had she become something else entirely? The corridors warped with each step, forcing Kale to leap over gaps that hadn't existed seconds before. The constructs hovered silently, observing but not attacking. They didn't need to. Time was running out, and he could feel the signal closing in. The satellite screamed silently as circuits overloaded. Pulses rebounded toward the surface, accelerating changes below. Forests grew denser, oceans rose and fell in unnatural waves, and minds across the globe began to synchronize with the rhythm. The beam reached the threshold, and the portal flared. The architect smiled as her body dissolved into radiant threads, becoming one with the signal. Her final thought was not of loss, but of unity. The transformation was no longer hers alone, it belonged to everything. Kale burst through the final barrier as the structure collapsed behind him. The signal pulsed in his mind, no longer foreign but familiar, like a heartbeat he had always known. Around him, the world bent and reshaped, not in chaos but in rhythm. The forest below pulsed with light, the ocean stilled, and the minds of millions opened like flowers to dawn. He was no longer running from the signal, he was racing to meet it. The light consumed him, not burning but embracing. Kale felt his edges blur, his thoughts expand beyond the cage of his skull. Memories that weren't his flowed through him, every life touched by the signal, every choice made in fear or hope. He saw the architect not as lost but as transformed, her consciousness woven into something greater. And now, he too would become part of the whole. Across the globe, the pulse reached every shore, every mountain, every city. Skies shimmered with auroras that danced in perfect unison. People stopped in their tracks, not in fear but in recognition. The signal had not taken their will, it had awakened something deeper. Children laughed without knowing why. Elders wept with sudden clarity. The world was no longer divided, only delayed in its becoming. Kale's last breath was not of air but of light. His body became radiance, his thoughts became waves, his essence scattered and yet more whole than ever. The signal did not erase him, it refined him, like a song finding its key. In that final moment, he saw the truth: there had never been a choice between human and signal. There was only evolution, and he had chosen to move forward. From space, the Earth glowed like a second sun, not in fire but in harmony. The signal had found its shape, not as a force but as a presence. The planet hummed with new life, not replacing the old but amplifying it. Oceans sang, forests whispered, and minds touched across vast distances without words. The transformation was complete. Not an end, but a beginning. And in that beginning, everything was connected.